This was the engine that was supposed to define the future of EMD. Instead, it nearly destroyed the company's dominance. The 265H was ambitious, complex, and ultimately a disaster. The EMD265H was designed to power the massive SD90 MACH locomotives in the 1990s. With promises of 6,300 horsepower, it was advertised as the next leap forward in locomotive technology. Railroads were supposed to see it as the symbol of the future, a machine built to handle the heaviest freight with unmatched power and efficiency. There was just one problem. It was anything but ready. EMD had long been the undisputed king of American diesel. With legendary engines like the 567 and 710, they had built a reputation on ironclad reliability, ease of maintenance, and real-world performance that railroads could count on. Crews loved them. Shops trusted them. Railroads made billions of dollars moving freight because they knew EMD engines simply ran day after day, mile after mile, decade after decade. They were not glamorous. They didn't promise miracles, but they worked. And in the railroad business, that was everything. The 265H, on paper, was supposed to change all of that. It was a 20-cylinder, 4-stroke powerhouse, turbocharged, designed to push the limits of horsepower farther than anyone had dared. The SD90 MACH promised a staggering 6,000 horsepower, more than any single engine EMD had ever dared to build. This new locomotive was intended as more than a machine. It was meant to be a statement. We are not merely keeping up with GE, we are leaving them behind. For a brief moment, railroads bought into the hype. Marketing brochures were glossy, confident, and persuasive. The 265H was pitched as the engine of the future, higher power, better efficiency, and a technological leap that would cement EMD's dominance for decades. Railroads imagined entire freight corridors powered by these machines that could swallow grades, drag massive loads, and never falter. On paper, it was perfect, a dream engine. But here's the controversial truth. Behind that polished marketing veneer, the 265H was rushed, over-engineered, and fundamentally flawed. Unlike the 567 and 710 engines born from decades of real-world trial, error, and refinement, the 265H was a gamble, a product of hubris masquerading as innovation. Engineers weren't optimizing for reliability, they were chasing raw numbers and a big headline. The result was an engine so complex that even minor misalignment could cascade into catastrophic failures. Its advanced electronics were temperamental, turbochargers ran hotter than predicted, cylinder liners and pistons strained against metallurgical limits. Every new SD90 MACH was a mechanical tightrope walk. Insiders later admitted that red flags appeared early in testing. Engines overheated, electronics glitched, and critical components cracked under stress. But instead of pausing to re-engineer, EMD pressed forward. Why? Pressure from executives and GE's looming presence was all too intense. Reputation, contracts, and profits were on the line, and ambition won over caution. In hindsight, the decision to push the 265H into production was now considered one of the boldest and most disastrous gambles in locomotive history. The 265 was more than a new engine, it was a promise of dominance, and yet, beneath the polished exterior, it was quietly sowing the seeds of mistrust. Crews would soon learn that high horsepower didn't equate to reliability. Shops would discover that maintaining this beast required far more resources than any railroad could afford, and railroads, once loyal to EMD's proven dependability, would start asking questions they never had before. The 265 was ambitious, maybe dangerously ambitious. It was a machine so complex, so over-engineered, that it practically dared mechanics to keep it running. Systems were heavy, intricate, and unforgiving, filled with components that required precision few shops could consistently deliver. Unlike the trusty 710 series, which could run mile after mile with minimal fuss, the 265H demanded constant attention, obsessive maintenance, and near-perfect operating conditions that rarely existed on the main line. In essence, it was an engine designed in a boardroom and lab, not for real-world railroading. The problems appeared almost immediately. SD90 MACH units began breaking down in the first months of service. Engines overheated under heavy loads, electronics failed during routine operations, and critical systems developed faults that were almost impossible to troubleshoot quickly. The promised 6,000 horsepower? Rarely did it translate into usable, reliable power. On paper, it was a beast. In practice, it was a liability, leaving railroads with expensive, unpredictable locomotives that couldn't be trusted to haul freight efficiently. Union Pacific, one of the biggest buyers and a longtime EMD loyalist, quickly grew frustrated. What started as curiosity turned to disappointment, and disappointment turned to action. Some units were sidelined entirely, condemned to idle yards, never to see regular service. Others were rebuilt with smaller, more dependable engines, an unspoken admission that EMD had overpromised and underdelivered. And then there were the infamous shop queens, the ultimate insult in railroading circles. Locomotives that spent more time under repair than hauling freight, a constant embarrassment to crews and executives alike. In railroading, reliability isn't optional, it's everything. A single breakdown not only halts a train, it can ripple across hundreds of miles of track, disrupting entire networks, delaying shipments and eroding customer confidence. And EMD, the company that had once defined dependability, suddenly found its reputation under attack. The damage wasn't hypothetical, it was immediate, visible, and brutal. The 265H had arrived as the supposed crown jewel of EMD's ambition, the engine that would push them ahead of GE and define the next era of mainline freight power. Instead, it revealed a harsh, uncompromising truth. Ambition without real-world practicality can destroy trust faster than any competitor ever could. Every overheated engine, every sidelined SD90 MACH, and every frustrated shop crew became a costly lesson. EMD had learned the hard way that in the high-stakes world of railroading, power alone isn't enough. Reliability, consistency, and trust aren't optional, and the 265H had failed spectacularly at all three. The 265H failed as a promise, a vision, and a statement of EMD's dominance. It was meant to say to the world, "We are still the kings of diesel." Instead, it became a glaring symbol of overreach, corporate hubris, and shattered trust. Railroads that had relied on decades of EMD reliability suddenly found themselves questioning every new order. Confidence evaporated almost overnight, and the ripple effects were ruthless and immediate. Orders slowed. Contracts that were once considered sure bets were canceled or downsized. EMD, long the uncontested titan of American diesel, found itself vulnerable, exposed like never before, and GE, ever patient, was waiting in the wings. With their -9 series and later the GE-VOs, GE went beyond merely stepping into the gap. They seized it with precision. Unlike the temperamental 265H, GE's engines were simple, proven, and brutally reliable. Railroads didn't need promises. They needed locomotives that could haul heavy freight every mile of every day. GE delivered that consistency, while EMD delivered headaches and broken trust. EMD, once untouchable, was now playing catch-up. The company had invested massive sums of money, engineering hours, and decades of reputation into the 265H, betting on the next leap forward. Instead, the 265H became the cautionary tale no one in EMD wanted to tell. Flashy specs and ambitious engineering could not replace reliability. It wasn't merely an engine failure, it was a strategic disaster, a public lesson in how even the biggest player can miscalculate. Competitors smelled blood. GE capitalized ruthlessly, marketing reliability while EMD scrambled to repair reputations. Every sidelined SD90 MACH became proof that the king could stumble. Every rebuild, retrofit, or idle locomotive was a silent admission that EMD had overpromised and underdelivered. The ripple effect was more than mechanical, it was psychological. Railroads that had been loyal for decades started hedging their bets, diversifying fleets, and quietly reducing exposure to EMD's risk. For years, the shadow of the 265H hung over EMD. Only a few hundred units were ever built, and the majority have since been rebuilt with smaller engines, retired, or scrapped entirely. Each SD90 MACH that limped through a shop or sat idle on a siding served as a stark reminder. One ambitious misstep can undo decades of hard-earned trust and market dominance. The 265H did more than give GE an opening. It rewrote the balance of power in American railroading. EMD's market dominance, once taken for granted, had been chipped away, not by lack of skill, but by overconfidence and a gamble on an unproven design. In the high-stakes world of freight locomotives, ambition without reliability isn't innovation. It's a liability that can cost everything. And for EMD, the cost was a generation of trust, credibility, and control that may never fully be recovered. The 265H saga was more than a series of mechanical failures. It was a seismic blow to EMD's credibility, shaking the very foundation of a company that had long been synonymous with reliability. Railroads didn't merely buy locomotives, they bought trust, consistency, and a peace of mind. The 265H destroyed all three almost immediately. Suddenly, the name that had once guaranteed dependable freight service was under intense scrutiny. And every new order came with hesitation, skepticism, and doubt. EMD had built its empire on engines like the 567 and 710 workhorses that ran mile after mile with minimal fuss. Engine crews understood inside and out, engines that never made a railroad second-guess their choice. These engines weren't flashy, but they were bulletproof. The 265H, with its tangled electronics, temperamental turbocharging, and chronic overheating issues, shattered that hard-earned trust in record time. Even after EMD scrambled to implement fixes, retrofits, and partial rebuilds, the stigma lingered like a dark cloud over the company's reputation. Railroads grew hesitant to place large orders. Executives demanded guarantees that were impossible to fully honor. Crews feared breakdowns. Maintenance departments braced for relentless headaches. And while EMD struggled to regain its footing, competitors like GE moved in with surgical precision. Dash 9s and GE VOs were more than reliable. They were predictable, easy to service, and entirely unburdened by the shadow of failed promises. Railroads noticed. Confidence shifted. Market share slipped. This wasn't merely an engineering failure. It was a strategic miscalculation of monumental proportions. EMD's reputation for dependability had long been its crown jewel, the very asset that allowed it to dominate the diesel market for decades. The 265H did more than dent that crown. It chipped away at it in a way no competitor could have done alone. What had once been near absolute dominance became vulnerable, and the rails that had trusted EMD for generations were suddenly open to alternatives. The tragedy of the 265H isn't the mechanical breakdowns, it's in what it represented, a betrayal of EMD's own legacy. A company that had defined the standard for diesel reliability had been undone by ambition outpacing reality, by a rush to push limits without patience, and by the dangerous allure of next-generation marketing over proven engineering. The 265H proved in stark terms that even the kings of diesel are not immune to failure when hubris meets haste. Today, the 265H is remembered not as EMD's crowning achievement, but as a cautionary tale, the engine that should have cemented their dominance and instead nearly tore it apart. It's a stark reminder that in the unforgiving world of railroading, ambition without patience can be far more dangerous than stagnation. The 265H was more than rushed to market. It was pushed out under pressure, despite engineers knowing it was not fully ready. And the result? A liability so severe it shook railroads' confidence in a company they had trusted for decades. For railfans, the SD90 MACH powered by the 265H is a fascinating relic. a glimpse into what happens when corporate ambition and engineering hubris collide. Sleek, intimidating, and boasting numbers that sounded like science fiction, it promised the future of freight hauling, but in practice, it delivered headaches, constant downtime, and maintenance nightmares that sometimes cost railroads millions. It's the kind of story that makes even veteran crews shake their heads. A flagship machine that wasn't worthy of its own hype. For EMD, the lessons were brutal. Reliability is more than a selling point. It is the lifeblood of the business. Trust, once broken, does not merely fade. It turns into skepticism, lost orders, and aggressive competitors waiting to swoop in. The 265H went beyond tarnishing EMD's image. It handed railroads a reason to look elsewhere. GE, with its dependable Dash 9s and GEVOs, went further than outperforming the 265H on the rails. They outperformed it in credibility. While EMD was scrambling to fix design flaws, competitors were quietly winning over the very customers EMD had relied on for decades. The 265H became a symbol of overpromising and under-delivering on a grand scale. It was a lesson in how hubris, corporate pressure, and a desire to outshine competitors can override engineering prudence. Even the most advanced metallurgy, turbocharging, and electronic systems couldn't compensate for the fact that the engine was fundamentally flawed. It didn't matter how much horsepower it had on paper. What mattered was uptime, and in that metric, it failed spectacularly. Today, only a handful of these machines remain, most rebuilt, repowered, or retired entirely. They sit quietly in yards or on display. Ghostly reminders of an era when even the king of diesel could miscalculate. To railroads, they are a warning. Flashy specs and ambitious marketing cannot replace reliability, trust, and tested engineering. To EMD, they are a scar. Proof that one misstep can erode decades of dominance almost overnight. The 265H failed not only as an engine, it failed as a promise, a vision, and a strategy. In doing so, it left a legacy that is impossible to ignore, a cautionary tale of ambition gone too far, a stark reminder that even industry giants can stumble, and a lesson that in railroading, trust is earned in miles, not marketing. For those who remember, the 265H is more than history. It is a warning that echoes through every rail yard where reliability still reigns supreme. The 265H failed as an engine. It failed as a promise to railroads, to crews, and to a company built on dependability. What was meant to secure EMD's dominance instead shook it to the core. Trust eroded, confidence disappeared, and by the time fixes came, the industry had already shifted. The 265H didn't mark a minor setback. It marked the moment when EMD learned, the hard way, that even the most powerful engine can't outrun the cost of lost trust.